Brian Patterson with you this morning in place of Hugh Hewitt, who is off on a Battleground Talkers tour stop. He was down in Philly yesterday and is kind of sleeping off the morning, and he will be joining us on Monday, and we'll be here for the duration until the election. 11 days is what we've got until we finally get this thing decided once and for all. And I've been pretty ebullient about the prospects of the former and I think future president. It makes Hugh nervous, actually, that I am as optimistic as I am. And let me get you to where I am and where I was a year ago, so you understand the perspective that I'm bringing it to you this morning. A year ago, when Donald Trump was in the primary process in a very contested field of very talented Republican candidates, Nikki Haley was in the mix, and you had Ron DeSantis was in the mix. There was lots of people on that stage. Chris Christie was in there. The entire array of all aspects of the Republican Party were represented. And the concern a lot of people had about Donald Trump a year ago going into the fall and winter season leading to the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire first in the primary was that Donald Trump's negatives that he had against him in 2020 were so vast and so big and so insurmountable that it would be really hard if he were to get the nomination to be able to pull off a win in November. And I was one of those people that was that concerned. Well, a funny thing happened. I said on the air, I said in the Huniverse, Huniverse.com, where I did an after show for about 15 years, I would tell subscribers to that site that barring absolute, convincing, persuasive data in polling that showed that Donald Trump could overcome those negatives, I would support him. I would do everything I could, but in my heart of hearts, I wouldn't think he would be able to pull it off. And as the months ticked by and as Joe Biden continued to demonstrate he is just not mentally fit for the job anymore, and he made that very much apparent during the debate with Donald Trump, and the Democrats kicked him to the curb, replaced him with Kamala Harris, who is even worse in her own way as being unfit for the office. I started to see more and more data come out and started to think, yeah, he actually's got a path. He can pull this off. And week by week, month by month, poll by poll, not any one poll, but all of them started to show data that this is not just a possibility, but it's getting to be, very likely. Now that we're 11 days out, here is the biggest metric I have to give you, to take away. The favorability index, the popularity of the candidates. In 2020, Donald Trump had the economic shutdown, the COVID, and lockdown debacle. There was lots of things that happened during that last year of his term, which was otherwise a very successful term. But the personal antics on Twitter, the shtick, it just got old, and Donald Trump was very unpopular going into the election cycle in 2020. How unpopular? Well, compared to Joe Biden, if you take Donald Trump's approval number, subtracting his disapproval, whatever that net is, and compare that to Joe Biden's metrics in 2020, and Donald Trump had a 17.4% deficit in likability, in approval to Joe Biden. That's hard to overcome. Now, Donald Trump generated 74.3 something million votes for him in 2020. But he also generated 81 million votes against him, largely because of that unfavorability index. Virtually nobody in 2020 voted for Joe Biden because of Joe Biden. They voted for Joe Biden because he wasn't Donald Trump. And so now flash forward to 2024. That index had been, Donald Trump was still upside down compared to Kamala Harris, but by nowhere near the same ratio, nowhere near the same percentage. And that number has been falling over the last few weeks. Now, lots of prediction down the stretch was that Kamala Harris, after her 10 days, 2 weeks of horrific media appearances, including the interview with Brett Baer and The View, and most recently the town hall on CNN, all these things would start to keep ticking away at her lead over Donald Trump in the Real Clear Politics average. And it has been ticking down. It now stands at like 0.3% or something like that, a statistical anomaly. But where her free fall has been is in approval, job approval, favorability. She is now, according to the Wall Street Journal this week, upside down by 12 points. And Donald Trump, in that same Wall Street Journal poll this week, he's up 4. That's a 16-point spread. And when you compare that to the 17 points and change that he was down to Joe Biden, that's a 33-point swing in favorability from 4 years ago to today. The anti-Trump sentiment is just not out there in the same intensity as it once was. Oh, there's still people that are going to vote for Kamala Harris because she's not Donald Trump. There's plenty of never-Trumpers out there. But they are not in the same numbers. They just aren't. And for all this talk about Donald Trump being, I'll never vote for the guy. I don't like him. I can't do it. Won't do it. Wouldn't be prudent. Here's a thing that happened just last night on News Nation Now. J.D. Vance, the vice presidential nominee for the Republicans, was the subject of a town hall with Chris Cuomo on News Nation Now. And he got a little philosophical about the election cycle and the heated rhetoric, which is way overkill right now. I mean, the Trump is Hitler, everything is Hitler. This is the end of the Republic as we know it. If X happens or Y wins, everything is just, dialed up to 11 on the intensity scale. And J.D. Vance is being the voice of calm. Here is what he said last night, cut number 30, Harley.
To me, the biggest threat to democracy is the rising tide of censorship. The idea that we should be trying to silence our fellow Americans rather than persuade them and talk to them. That's always going to lead to people being pissed off because they don't like to be told what to think or what to say. They like to talk to one another. And that's one thing that I'll always commit to. As you're vice president for the next 4 years, I'll always try to talk to people. We'll go out there and we'll do events with people who disagree with us. We'll answer questions from people who don't always see eye to eye. But I think if we set the tone at the top, the leadership of this country is all about communicating with one another. I think that's how we start to heal the divide, but we all have a role in it. And one final point I'll say about this, and, don't get too personal all the time, but, one of the things I've seen, especially from, some of my wife's friends and some of my friends, is that they disagree with us on politics sometimes. They'll get very personal about it. And if you're discarding a lifelong friendship because somebody votes for the other team, then you've made a terrible, terrible mistake and you should do something different. Like, don't cast aside. Like, most of my family obviously is going to vote for, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And if they're not, actually, I need to talk to them. But I've got friends who like me personally, acquaintances who aren't necessarily going to vote for me. That doesn't make them bad people. And we can't, this is my most important advice, whether you vote for me, whether you vote for Donald Trump, whether you vote for Kamala Harris, don't cast aside family members and lifelong friendships. Politics is not worth it. And I think if we follow that principle, we'll heal the divide in this country. Thank you, Matt.
I can't begin to tell you how much of a home run that answer is. And it's genuine. And it's everything that you want to hear out of a candidate for high office in this country. I mean, go to the mattresses over issues, you betcha. But it's not worth losing your family over. It's not worth going to civil war over. And J.D. Vance struck a tone, even with people like Frank Luntz, who holds focus groups all the time with independents watching these kinds of things. His focus group, here's what Frank Luntz said on X just a couple of hours ago. It's words like this, and he cited the clip I just played for you. It's words like this that have made quite a few undecided voters in my focus group say, I don't like Trump at all, but I am going to cast my vote for J.D. Vance. Because of the four, he's the most positive. Be energetic, be enthusiastic, be intense if you need to, but stay positive and you'll win more people over. Dwayne Patterson in for Hugh today, as Hugh is returning from Philly in a Salem Battleground Talkers Tour stop last night. He will be back with you for the duration, starting on Monday through Election Day, and I can't wait to see what he thinks about the closing stretch of the campaign. I'll tell you how both campaigns are reacting in just a minute. The vibes that you're getting. If this was supposed to be the vibes campaign that the left tried to say Kamala Harris was about, right? The joy campaign. Well, let's kind of analyze how both camps are acting and showing how they feel about where the state of the race is. And maybe that will convince you why it's good to be optimistic. Don't take your foot off the gas pedal. You're still working. You still got to get people out to vote. You still got to support all the candidates. You still got to do everything you need to do and pretend like you're down. You know, you still have to be motivated. You still got to crawl through the broken glass to vote. But be encouraged that we're winning. It's going to happen. We just have to finish the race, finish the task in front of us. But it's going to happen. All the signs, both sides. Unlike 2012. Look, I got caught up in the Mitt Romney momentum in 2012. We thought we were going to win because we thought we had metrics that showed we were doing okay. But if you look at the Barack Obama camp in 2012, they never really were that worried. Now, flash forward to today, they're worried. And there's plenty of stuff in evidence of that I'm going to play you coming up after the break. But look at how the market's reacting. They're starting to kind of act as though the election of Donald Trump is baked in. You heard the former president yesterday with Hugh Hewitt say that Tim Cook of Apple called him and said, hey, I got a problem that's going to need help in this next term. Tim Cook is acting like Donald Trump's already president, and he's already trying to ingratiate himself, and he's baked in how this election's going to be. Gold seems to be baking in how the election's going to go based upon all of the metrics out there. And, of course, this segment brought to us by American Federal, Gold and Bullion, AmericanFederal.com. And you can call 800-221-7694 or go to AmericanFederal.com, 800-221-7694. Gold is off about $17, a little over $17 from yesterday. Now, that's a big drop, although it's still sitting at $2,700, like $2,731 in pre-market trading. Now, why is it off $17 roughly? Could it be that maybe the market's trying to signal that, hey, if Trump gets in, maybe things are going to plane out a little bit economically. Maybe things are going to be okay. Maybe we don't have to sink things into gold. I mean, there's all sorts of international pressures that may go into it, but it's certainly worth a call to Nick Grovich over at American Federal and maybe ask him, is this the buy point? Is this kind of a false bottom? Is this an entry level to get into gold, or at least invest part of your portfolio in gold now that it's slipped a little bit because it may be going up again? There's all sorts of things to learn about it. Don't pretend that you know it all yourself. Talk to the experts. Nick Grovich at AmericanFederal.com, 800-221-7694. I mentioned how everybody is reacting on the right and on the left. I'll tell you a little bit more about how the Trump campaign is feeling and acting down the stretch, and it's really pretty fun to watch. Now, compare this to how the left is doing it. Pick Tim Walz, for example. Tim Walz was at a North Carolina rally on Thursday and had this to say. Cut number one.
Look, I don't say this lightly because I didn't, in my 60 damn years, I didn't think I'd ever see a candidate for president praising Adolf Hitler's generals or talking about using the military against their enemies. And I mean, it's pretty stunning. And I said, look, I recognize I'm on the top of his list, But don't kid yourself. You're somewhere on that list, too, if you disagree with these people. That's who they are.
You know, back in July on the 8th, the Babylon Bee, the spoof site, right? The Babylon Bee had a headline: Dems announce comprehensive plan to win the election by calling Trump Hitler again. And darned if that's not their closing message. That's all we're getting is Hitler, 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 Hitler. It's not just Tim Walz saying it. It's Kamala Harris saying it. It's Hillary Clinton saying it. It's media saying it. That's the big closing argument. The Atlantic tried to say he's going to be Hitler again article. That's all they've got. They've got nothing to run for. They've only got the scare tactics, and it's not going to work because the favorability doesn't go along with it like it did in 2020. I'm in for Hugh at least until the third hour when he will return and conduct another edition of the Hillsdale Dialogue, so I hope you tune in for that. They're going to dive even deeper into Plato's Republic as they've been doing for the last, couple of months or so. Look, this is a campaign about vibes, I'm reliably told by media. This is a campaign about joy. Because Kamala Harris is the joy candidate. She's just having fun wherever she goes. And that fun is infectious. And that fun is going to be what carries her across the finish line compared to Donald Trump, who is basically Hitler, right? That's the narrative that we're trying to be fed by media, except, of course, it's not reflecting in any polling metric. New York Times Siena poll came out earlier this morning. Straight up tie, their final national poll, 48-48, absolute dead heat, pick 'em tie. I like my chances if the New York Times Siena poll is at a tie. Why? Because in 2020, they missed by 5.1%. You want to guess which direction they missed? That's right. They oversampled the Democrats. 92% of the time in all of their polling in the 2020 cycle, the New York Times Siena poll missed, coincidentally enough, in favor of the Democrats. And so if they've got it a straight-up tie, I like our chances. There's lots of reasons why. But let's look at how the campaigns are going down the stretch and just kind of do a little compare and contrast, just in the last 24, 48 hours. Here's Donald Trump on stage at a rally. I think this one was in North Carolina. But tell me if you think that Donald Trump is starting to enjoy the ride and having a little fun right now. Cut number 18. Brings a small child dressed in a Trump suit with the hair and the comb over. He's holding the kid and coming up to the mic.
What's your name?
Name.
Now, he's supposed to look like Donald Trump, but he's
So
actually
you've got that going on. Then you've got J.D. Vance, who's on News Nation Now with Chris Cuomo last night. And he has a town hall, right? And so Chris Cuomo pulls a fast one on J.D. Vance and says, we're going to go to a questioner on the phone line who has a question for you. And that questioner happens to be Donald J. Trump. So here's how that went. Cut number 19.
Call right now from former President Donald John Trump. He wants to weigh in. Mr. President, I know there's a little bit of a delay. Can you hear us? And what is your question for the senator?
Well, I can hear you, Chris, and I do have a question, and I think it'll be quite an interesting one. The answer should be easy. How brilliant is Donald J. Trump?
Take your time. Think about it.
Well, first of all, sir, this is supposed to be undecided voters. I would hope that I have your vote, of all people. But here's first of all, sir, of course, you're very brilliant, and we both agree. We both agree that it's important to have very smart people running our government. But here's the thing about President Trump that, aside of you, sir, if you'll forgive me for telling this story, that I think often people don't see. And of course, I got my beautiful wife here in the front row, and one of my favorite moments with President Trump is we were hosting an event for him near our home in Cincinnati a few months ago. And of course, my wife was a little bit nervous to really, talk to the president of the United States. And he asked her, what do you think about your husband being in public service? And she gives, if you know my wife, a very diplomatic answer. Sir, he really cares about the people of Ohio. He's thrilled to be able to serve them, and I'm happy to support him however I can. And President Trump chuckles and goes, yeah, my wife hates it too. and the thing that it did is it just immediately broke the barrier. And it wasn't the former president. It was just a person talking to my wife. And I think you guys were able to have a nice conversation. But that ability to relate to anybody in any environment, I think that's the true brilliance of Donald J. Trump.
Okay, so they're having fun, right? And there's lots of people out there that just reflexively hate Trump and say, oh, the ego. He's got how brilliant is Donald Trump? And they just obsess over that, right? But he's having fun. And he knew it was tongue-in-cheek. It was shtick. He was having fun with it. And everybody laughed and got the joke, and they're enjoying the ride because they know they've got a plan. They know they've got a way forward, and it's going to be okay on the other side. We're going to fix this, which is a very positive message. Now, contrast that to Georgia last night. Bruce Springsteen performed a concert in benefit of Kamala Harris, and he was the opening act. Left the stage and turned it over to Barack Obama. Former President Obama spoke for a while. He was technically the headliner because as soon as he left the stage and turned it over to Kamala Harris, the crowd started thinning out. In fact, the stadium emptied out like an Angels game after the sixth inning. Right? People didn't want to listen to Kamala Harris. They wanted to hear Springsteen, and Obama might be kind of fun to listen to. But yeah, if you're watching the Salem News Channel, this is what happened when Kamala took the stage, and now there's empty seats everywhere as people are filing for the exits. That's not a good look going out. But what did Barack Obama say? He's being deployed as we've got to save this at all costs. Here is Barack Obama, cut number 23.
And the good news is that Kamala Harris is ready for the job. This is a leader who has spent her life fighting on behalf of people who need a voice, who need a champion. Kamala wasn't born into privilege. She was raised in a middle-class family. She worked at McDonald's when she
know
was
that, by the
in
way.
college to pay her
I was
expenses.
unclear. I was unclear that Kamala Harris was born into a middle-class family. I thought that was her set answer to every question that she wouldn't answer. Was I was born into a middle-class family. Now Barack Obama is lapsing into that because he's got nothing else to offer? Continue.
Pretend to work at McDonald's when it was closed.
Wait, so he's bringing up the McDonald's stunt that Donald Trump did? When are you guys going to take the loss and just move on and do something else? Barack Obama is still keeping the McDonald's story alive 6 days later. It's astounding. You're never going to put that genie back in the bottle, and you're never going to make Donald Trump unlikable again. No matter how hard you try, all you're doing is you're reminding people, that was kind of a fun moment. That was a lighthearted moment. That was actually fun. And he's trying to criticize it. Now, Donald Trump has already made a campaign ad out of something else that Barack Obama said last night. Took about 30 minutes. Cut number 27.
Too many folks here in Georgia and across the country are struggling to pay the bills. We all know the price of everything from housing to health care to groceries is still too high, and it hurts.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Healthcare costs are too high, says the author of Obamacare. We had to pass Obamacare because that was the only way we're going to get healthcare costs under control. And Barack Obama, a decade plus later, is now saying healthcare costs are still too high. Oh, good to know that. Now, who else have the Democrats deployed? Well, another former president, William Jefferson Blythe Clinton. That's right. I'm back. I'm in Arizona. And now that I'm in Arizona, I need to talk about this Senate race as long as I'm out here because, this Senate race, it features a Republican woman. And Boy, she's a fine-looking woman. Here's Bill Clinton talking about Carrie Lake, cut number 5.
I thought, this is like a beautiful microcosm of the campaign that Kamala Harris is running for president. You've got a person that grew up under sometimes challenging circumstances, who made something of his life running against someone who is physically attractive but believes.
Oh boy, she's a good-looking woman. Let me tell you, and I've known a few good-looking women in my time. Do you really think that that's what the campaign office in Delaware wants Bill Clinton to be talking about? A fine-looking woman? You see, I'm thinking that's not what they want to do. So Bill Clinton's out on the trail, and CNN grabbed Hillary Clinton to do cleanup on aisle 9 after Kamala's debacle of a town hall Wednesday night. Here comes Hillary Clinton to the rescue, apparently. Cut number 26.
And, one other thing that you'll see next week, Caitlin, is Trump actually reenacting the Madison Square Garden rally in 1939. I write about this in my book. President Franklin Roosevelt was appalled that neo-Nazis, fascists in America...
Okay. So the MSG, the Madison Square Garden rally Trump's doing next week is going to be the Nuremberg rally, apparently. That's all they got is Hitler, Hitler, Hitler. She went on in this CNN interview to criticize Project 25. She's still going down that road. Look, we've told you on this show for months about what Project 2025 is really all about. You go to 25truth.com. That's 25truth.com. That's our friends at the Heritage Foundation. You can learn what's actually in it, not what's being scaremongered about by old candidates like Hillary Clinton that are irrelevant. Learn more at 25truth.com. That's 25truth.com. And join me after the break, hopefully with Dr. Michael Oren from Israel. I am joined by a good, dear friend of mine and the programs. For about the last couple of decades, I've known Dr. Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. I remember talking to him while he was in a tank overlooking the Golan Heights. I mean, there's all sorts of times we've been talking to Michael over the years. And he joins us now from Israel. Dr. Oren, welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Good to talk to you.
Great to be with you, Dwayne, as always. Hi. Good morning to everybody.
I know you are loath to talk domestic American politics, especially close to an election, but it would be journalistic malpractice if I did not play you one clip of Kamala Harris on a CNN town hall on Wednesday night. She was asked one question and one question only about the Israeli war against all the proxies, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, or whatever. And, of course, the questioner framed it in the question of what can we do for the poor Gazans? And I want to play this cut for you and get your reaction to it. You can take it however you want to take it, but I bet you can guess how I reacted to it. Let's play cut number 16
My
for
question
him.
is, as president, what would you do to ensure not another Palestinian dies due to bombs being funded by U.S. tax dollars?
So I will say, and I think this is to your point, far too many innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed. It's unconscionable. And we are now at a place where with Sinwar's death, I do believe we have an opportunity to end this war, bring the hostages home, bring relief to the Palestinian people, and work toward a two-state solution where Israel and the Palestinians in equal measure have security, where the Palestinian people have dignity, self-determination, and the safety that they so rightly deserve.
Dr. Oren, to me, that is a rote, memorized answer, a general answer that she has been focus grouped and thinks that that's the right answer to any Middle Eastern question. But it's nonsense. But that's my opinion. What do you think? How do you react to that?
It's not shocking. I've heard it many times from Kamala Harris. I've heard it 10 times from many representatives of the Democratic Party. It's the position of this administration. I think it'll be the position of the Obama administration. Nothing surprising about it. To say, personally, as an Israeli, it's disappointing because it assumes that Israel alone can end this war. The war ends when Hamas surrenders. The hostages are free when Hamas gives up the hostages. There's no sense in that boilerplate answer that Israel is fighting a multi-front war for its survival and fighting a generational war with Iran, and that our enemies are also the enemies that seek the destruction of the United States. And
speaking of that multi-front war, we saw a video release, I think it was through the IDF yesterday, of a weapons cache in southern Lebanon that the IDF seized from a former Hezbollah stronghold. And, I'm no weapons expert, but there's a whole bunch of it. And two, it looks like a lot of it's Russian, but it had to be funneled through to Iran. It's a multi-front war. The head of the snake's got to be confronted at some point, Michael.
And it's also Russia. We know that Russia has been helping the Houthis to target international shipping through the Mandab Straits. We know that Russia has provided Iran with hypersonic missile technology that has found its way into the hands of the Houthis. We've now taken down 3 of these rockets. We're saying this is a global conflict going on here. And the attempt to reduce it to Gaza and to entirely too many Palestinians have been killed, which is always a very strange locution, by the way. Because it suggests that there's some number that would have been okay, right? As far as I'm concerned, every civilian death is a tragedy,
of
right?
course.
But entirely too many Palestinians have been killed is a very strange locution. The administration has used this since at least the end of October 2023. Entirely too many. By the way, entirely too many Israelis have been killed, and entirely too many Israelis continue to be killed, including 5 soldiers yesterday.
This week,
civilians.
yes.
Yeah, I just give you an example. Last night I listened to a 7-minute item on the network that you just showed, and in those 7 minutes, it was all about the situation up north. It was all about how Israel is causing destruction in Lebanon, how Israel is blowing up buildings in Lebanon, causing hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes. It goes on and on and on for 7 minutes. In not 1 minute of that very long item was one rocket mentioned of the some 600 rockets that have been fired at the north over the last 4 or 5 days.
Yes, I've seen the alerts too.
And this household in bomb shelters, not one. And what's going on? I later got onto Fox News and I talked about this last night. If anybody caught it with Neil Caputo, I talked about how this is simply propaganda for Hezbollah. This isn't journalism. There's nothing remotely journalistic about it. And the American people are being profoundly misinformed. And maybe that type of misinformation leads to that type of response, which says this is about Gaza and not about Israel's war for survival.
We saw Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday speak to Jews worldwide and say, you have to stand, you have to unite, we have to save the West. And maybe that counter message will carry the day. Dr. Michael Oren from Israel, thank you very much. We will talk to you, of course, next week and as events develop. Hour 2 of the Hugh Hewitt Show unfolds as Dwayne Patterson, that's me, fills in for Hugh Hewitt, who is away at a Salem Battleground Talkers Tour. He spoke to a whole bunch of people in Philadelphia last night, and he's working his way back up to Studio Beltway, and will be here with us for the duration starting on Monday. Actually, he'll be back in hour 3 with the Hillsdale Dialogue, so join us for that. But while we stand by for Ben Domenech, let's get back to how the two campaigns are acting going down the stretch 11 days out. We played a little bit of Donald Trump and how much fun he's having and just kind of getting a kick out of things. Now let's contrast that with who the left is deploying, right? And I mentioned that they sent Bill Clinton to Arizona, and he was commenting on the personal appearance of Kari Lake. That's not the only thing that Bill Clinton offered. Here is a little bit more Bill Clinton for you, cut number 6.
But about 45% of the people think he can do no wrong, and they don't care if we save our democracy or not. So there is a sliver there that has to make up their mind. And to them, Kamala Harris just showed up. I mean, she was there as vice president, and what they think of her largely depends on what they think of President Biden. But she is extremely vulnerable, more vulnerable than she deserves to be, through crazy attacks. So they've been thinking, the Republicans, all this time, how can we go on the attack?
Now, you might be thinking that it's inappropriate for somebody like me to be talking about the vulnerability of women. Not that I did anything wrong back in the day, but you know that if I'm not the worst person that the Democrats could use to talk about the vulnerability of women, that's only because Doug Emhoff is out there behind me. Doug Emhoff could be worse on vulnerability on women on this subject. So I'm actually better. I'm actually more appropriate to talk about that subject than anybody else in the party right now. Hillary Clinton, his wife, was on CNN. I mentioned this earlier with Caitlin Collins. And this was a cleanup attempt at just debris left in the wake by Kamala Harris's town hall with Anderson Cooper. And here's another clip of Hillary Clinton talking about, 2016, because that's what's really important. Cut number 24.
You're looking at where we are 12 days out. Polling averages in 2016 at this time had you on pace for a bigger win than President Obama had 4 years before. And of course, you know better than anyone how those next 12 days went. What do you think Vice President Harris needs to do, in your view, to avoid a repeat?
Well, first of all, I don't think she has Jim Comey in the wings waiting to kneecap her, so that's good, and I'm very grateful for that. But I think she is doing what she needs to do. And in reporting from today, I think by CNN, a number of the voters who were at your town hall have said she convinced them, that she had shown the kind of empathy and concern about their problems, that she'd come forward with her ideas, her suggested policies. So I think she's doing what she needs to do. And from my perspective, you know, that's not only her job, it's the job of all of us who are supporting her. It's obviously the job of the messaging, the advertising, everything that goes into the final sprint to the election. Because I think that the information is out there for voters who are looking for it. You can go to her campaign webpage. You can read about what she wants to do to lower the cost of housing, how she wants to take on people who are exploiting pricing of necessary goods, whether it's groceries or anything else. She talks about how she has a plan for long-term care, one of the biggest expenses.
I can't take it anymore. Here's the thing. Kamala Harris, you know this to be true, right? I don't care if you don't like Trump or not, but you know this to be true. Kamala Harris is the worst political tone-deaf candidate in American electoral history. Certainly in your lifetime, probably in your grandparents' lifetime. She is the worst at running a campaign that we have ever seen. Now, the person that held that record, the one that had the title until Kamala Harris came along in July, was Hillary Clinton in 2016. And so the Democrats are now at the point where they're so desperate that Hillary Clinton looks good by comparison. She's an improvement over Kamala Harris. In fact, since we're talking about 2016 again and 2024, let's do closing messages, Democratic style, in stereo. Let's play cut number 28.
Sick and tired of the negative, dark, divisive, dangerous vision and behavior of people who support Donald Trump. It is time for us to say no. We are not going backwards. We're going forward.
You still want to know why I'm optimistic? you still think that Donald Trump doesn't have a chance? Now contrast that closing message, both in 2016 and this week, to Donald Trump at a Turning Point rally in Las Vegas last night. Cut number 20.
This election is the choice between whether we will have 4 more years of incompetence, failure, and disaster, or whether we will begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country. We can do that. It's not too late. It's not too late. A couple of years like this, it will be too late. You'll never put it together again. After all the catastrophes that she has caused, Kamala Harris can't say one thing that she'd do differently. Did you see that the other night? Would you name one thing? How about 20? Would you name like 25, 30? But I'm asking you to be excited about the future of our country again. You're going to be excited. Because this will be America's new golden age. It's going to be the golden age of America. You watch. You watch.
He's looking forward. This is going to be the golden age again. We are going to be better than we were. We're going to fix things. Again, contrast that to what you heard from Hillary Clinton both in 2016 and Kamala Harris from 2024. Now, again, vibes, right? How people are reacting to it, the emotions that they're attaching to it. Here's Mika Brzezinski on Morning Joe yesterday morning, cut number 29.
His cozying up to dictators, his obsession with Hitler that has now come out, what he has said about our veterans, and what he wants to do with the military against his political adversaries, it's all huge news. This is the future that we're looking at in the next Trump term, if there is one. But this is what voters know right now, that he is killing us. I'm talking about us women. He's killing us. He is putting us at risk. He is making us afraid to have babies. He is putting our reproductive health at risk, and some women have died already because of this. So we can see right now what's coming. These headlines, and very good reporting, by the way, that shouldn't be questioned by idiots about what Trump has said about Hitler, that's incredibly important to know. But I do understand that people who are busy and that are people who are just tapping in may not be able to comprehend, because we've been free. We've been comfortable. We cannot comprehend that. And I understand that. I validate that it is hard to go from here to there. It is where we're going. I hope we don't find out the hard way. But what's happening with women right now is real, and it is playing out across America.
So do you realize what she's doing? 2 things she's doing there. Number one, do you think she thinks that Kamala Harris is going to win? If she was on the truth serum and had to tell you who she thinks is going to win based upon all the metrics and data she's seen, who do you think she thinks is winning? How is she acting? That's number one. Number two, do you think the Trump is Hitler thing is working after calling him Hitler coming down from 2015? The leftist, George W. Bush in 2004 was Hitler. They've been trying this bit for 20 years. And at some point, it uses up its effectiveness. It's not working, and they have no other message, and they're panicking.
Tarzan and Joe. Hello, Joe. I had to tape this on Thursday because I'm gone on Friday, so we're leaning forward a little bit.
Enjoy the city of brotherly love. Perhaps I'm just too young to know or too old to remember how issues came in focus as we moved into November. Should we be in the businesses of every foreign nation or focus on the benefits of splendid isolation? Should we resist the dominoes as they remake the map, or verify and then confront the growing missile gap? But news of our elections now is only about polling. Just between the two of us, I'd rather watch pro bowling. Or maybe they're reporting on some statement that was rotten, remembered as an outrage that for 4 years was forgotten. The papers and the networks have put us in this pickle. All they have is clickbait, and it isn't worth a nickel. They've lost a lot of backbone, forgotten how to show one, so much so that the LA Times this year endorses no one. Another thing about this race that elevates my hackles is how the current president thinks Trump should be in shackles, and how at every question the current runner cackles. Still, with the finest pollsters and some pundits to advise me, because it's still October, nothing would surprise me. That's The Fall Classic by Tarzana Joe.
Well said, Joe. I wish you would talk to my producer, Dwayne, about Nothing Is For Certain, because he's going off behind the curtain and, telling everyone Trump's winning. I don't like that. So you can lecture him at length. I want to tell people that if they need a poem, they go to tarzanajoe.com. Will today's closing argument be posted over at tarzanajoe.com?
Absolutely.
How is business by people emailing tarzanajoe@reagan.com? I mean, people are paying attention to the race. I don't know if they're getting their poems in.
Business is wonderful. The best way to communicate with me is through the website, because there's a page that says I want a poem, and I ask all the pertinent questions, fill in the blanks, and we begin our communications.
We've been doing this for, 23 years, Joe, and you've never said that before.
I think I have.
Not the best way. You've never told me before that there are things to fill in that help you get started. You're like andrewandtodd.com. So we want you to go to tarzanajoe.com. You can always email him, tarzanajoe@reagan.com, but now I'm going to push tarzanajoe.com. Thank you, Joe. Off to the airport.
Enjoy the flight.
And thank you, Hugh. The thing about Hugh being upset with me for being optimistic, I am optimistic. I remain so. We're going to be joined in a little bit by Jim Talent, who will temper my optimism, former senator from Missouri, good friend of mine, and Sarah Bedford over at the Washington Examiner, who I think is kind of coming around to my point of view as well. There's an Axios story this morning by Mike Allen and Jim Vandehei, the two founders of Axios. And just a couple of grabs. A growing number of top Democrats tell us privately they feel Harris will lose, even though polls show a coin toss finish. This is after the Democrats spent $1 billion over the last 3 months. $1 billion to rebrand her image, and her approval has collapsed. It's just a sinkhole of cash. You know what else is not a sinkhole of cash? You being able to get control of your weight. You still can go to myphdweightloss.com. You don't have to take the drugs. You don't have to do the shots. You don't have to be spending $1,000 for a month for life to be on all these designer new drugs to lose weight. You can do it safely, the good old-fashioned way, have a counselor to be accountable to, and work your way through your schedule on your pace to lose the pounds that you know you need to lose. 864-644-1900 is where you go. 864-644-1900 or myphdweightloss.com. I lost 50 pounds. I've kept most of it off. And even when I kind of fudge for a weekend or go on a trip, it's really easy to recommence and get back to where you need to go. myphdweightloss.com. Coming up after the break, the aforementioned Jim Talent, former senator of Missouri, who I talked to on my Dwayne's World podcast a little bit earlier this week, and we had a really good time handicapping kind of the state of the campaign. We'll kind of continue that after the break. And by the way, if you want to learn more about Dwayne's World, my podcast, which I hope you do, go to Dwayne.world, DUANE.world, and it'll have links to my hot air columns, and it'll point you to all of the previous episodes of Dwayne's World, the podcast. Right now, I'm joined by a very, very good friend of mine. Usually sits in with me on Tuesdays on my Dwayne's World podcast. And of course, you hear him usually on Thursdays on the Hewitt Show. But this week, for whatever reason, he's on a Friday. Jim Talent, former senator of Missouri and a guy who normally kind of hangs his shingle these days out at the Reagan Institute as the chairman of the National Leadership Council. Hello, Jim, my friend. How are you?
I'm fine, Dwayne, and I'm on Friday because, as you recall, you had a different and more important guest on yesterday morning. He had Donald Trump.
Yeah, somebody named Trump. Yes, that was the case. We had to kind of blow out the calendar a little bit. So let's when you and I last spoke for the podcast on Tuesday afternoon, I was bullish. You were, I think your phrase was cautiously optimistic. And since that time, we had the absolute debacle of a town hall on CNN by Kamala Harris. And you're seeing how both teams are kind of deploying resources down the stretch. Bill Clinton out in Arizona talking about the vulnerability of women and how good-looking Carrie Lake is. You've got Hillary Clinton talking about Jim Comey handicapping or kneecapping her in 2016 and how Trump rallies are going to be like Nuremberg. Are you a little more bullish than you were 3 days ago?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I am. And let me take a different kind of cut at this for a second to explain why. Okay, so let's look at the messages of the two campaigns over the last 3 or 4 months. In the case of the Trump campaign, this has been the message from the beginning. Okay, it's that, look, things are bad now. The borders completely porous. I mean, we could go on forever about the implications of that in terms of the economy, crime, fentanyl, gangs, the whole thing. Inflation is squeezing everybody. Crime is up. And yet, when Donald Trump was president, things were good. Real wages were going up. We had peace in the world. And things can be good again if Donald Trump gets reelected. That's a powerful, relevant message, the kind of thing that moves voters. And they have been disciplined over time, Trump and Vance. And I think the addition of Vance has validated Trump's judgment because he's delivering the same message, but he's balancing out Trump in the way he delivers it. So that's a really good message. It's credible and it's true. And what has Harris's message been? Well, first it was you're weird if you don't vote for her. Then she's the candidate of joy. Then she's really a moderate and she has a Glock and will shoot people. Then they walked that back. Then she was the candidate of change. And then she said, well, I wouldn't do anything different from what Joe Biden has done. So you can see they don't have a message. It's incoherent. And I think that's one of the reasons I am cautiously optimistic. I'm seeing a disciplined campaign with a credible and powerful message. And I'm seeing another campaign with no message. And also, as we've discussed, a very lackluster candidate.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of lackluster candidates, you used to serve in the United States Senate from the Show Me State of Missouri. And there actually is a Senate race this cycle in Missouri, as Josh Hawley is running for re-election against a guy who, I'm checking my notes, shot a journalist this week, Jim Talent. Is there anybody in American politics having more fun than Donald Trump and J.D. Vance these days, except, of course, maybe this week with Josh Hawley?
Yeah, it's not a good thing when you have an event that's aimed at showing that you really are for the Second Amendment when you're not, and then you end up actually shooting somebody. Yeah, the last person who did that, although it wasn't a campaign event, was Dick Cheney, and
right.
It was kind of a gift to Josh. I have a great confidence that Josh Hawley's going to win. He should win. He's represented Missouri and Missouri values very well and done a great job in his first term. So I think he's going to do fine. But yes, that was an interesting moment in the silly season. Yeah.
I want to play a couple of clips from Kamala's disaster on CNN in one of the collar counties around Philadelphia Wednesday night. She was asked about how she's going to jam through legislation. Anderson Cooper pressed her. And when she said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And he said, but what if you don't have the House? What are you going to be able to do? And here is what she had to say, cut number 17.
Let me ask you, you've talked about codifying Roe v. Wade. That would obviously require
60 votes in the Senate, a majority of the House. That's a big leap. We don't have that yet. If that's not possible to codify it in the House, what do you do?
I think we need to take a look at the filibuster, to be honest with you. But the reality of it is this. Let's talk about how we got here.
Jim Talent, she served in the United States Senate. The question by Anderson Cooper was, if you can't get this codified in the House, what do you do? Her answer is, if I can't get it through the House, I'm going to destroy the filibuster. Jim, that's not how any of this works. Even if she could do that, that's not the path for how legislation moves. You don't get to just skip one house and go through the other.
It's a bicameral legislative body. You have to pass the bills through both houses, and there is no filibuster in the House. If you don't have the votes, you don't have the votes. So there were a lot of ways for her to answer that from her point of view that would have been acceptable. Some of them would have been good. She did not pick an acceptable way. What she revealed was her ignorance of the legislative, process. And, as we discussed the other day, Hughes talked about her as being vacuous. And the way I put it is I think her weakness is she doesn't have any strengths that her campaign can build on. So, look, it just is what it is. I mean, she's not spontaneous. She's not authentic. She's not warm. She doesn't have a relatable backstory. Hence, her insisting that she did in fact work at McDonald's because she wants to say something about herself people can relate to. She's intellectually incurious. She doesn't prepare well, and she doesn't understand policy, and she doesn't understand the process. And look, there is no way, in fairness to Democratic voters, they would not have chosen her if they'd had the option. And in fairness to Democratic professionals, they wouldn't have picked her if they'd had any other alternative. So they're stuck with her. And that does make it worse. But I think, again, the real issue here, I think the underlying weakness of the campaign is the weakness of the message because they've been governing for 4 years and their policies have been a disaster and they're hurting the American people. And everybody knows it. And that's not a weakness that Kamala Harris can solve in the next couple of weeks. I think even a stronger candidate would be having a problem.
I think so. And her problems actually compound as of this morning by your colleagues over at National Review. James Lynch has an explosive piece out this morning. And again, this is a website that is largely populated by people that aren't huge fans of Donald Trump, right? There's lots of National Review types that are not supporters at all. In fact, there's many that are in the Never Trump camp. But they have this piece of reporting about how Kamala Harris greatly exaggerated. This isn't even just a plagiarizing stuff that should be disqualifying. But she greatly exaggerated her prosecutorial record during her district attorney campaign. And this is a long, exhaustive thing about how her set answer on any immigration thing is, well, I prosecuted transnational gangs. That's her shield she hides behind, even though that has nothing to do with the question at hand, but that's her shield. You dig into her prosecutorial record, and she actually didn't prosecute transnational gangs. In fact, what it apparently shows that the number of cases where she actually prosecuted, you can count on one hand. And she wasn't really that darn good at it, Jim.
No. And I think her record is in public life is undistinguished by any real success. I mean, again, I don't. She's a lackluster candidate. We talked about this in the summer, Dwayne, when the issue of whether Biden would stay on the ticket was being mooted. And I said at the time that I fully understood why Obama did, from my perspective, everything he could to keep Biden on the ticket. And I think one of the reasons is that they knew that they were going, if they did replace him, it would have to be with the vice president. And they strongly suspected she would not be a good candidate. I think, what was that lip reading story we had a week ago or so, where Obama was talking with Biden, And
Yes,
according to the lip
at
reading, they said
Ethel Kennedy's funeral service, right?
she's pretty weak. And I can see this when I see Obama and Clinton campaigning for her. And actually, maybe I'll go into that for just a minute. So I've given 100 speeches on behalf of other candidates over the years. And what you do when somebody asks you to speak on their behalf is you say to them, well, what do you want me to say? What points do you want me to hit? And we were just talking about her message, which is basically completely incoherent. So other than the fact that they probably said, well, say that she's from the middle class. So they're going to hit that all the time. And then they don't have much else to say. And so they go
Except Trump is Hitler. That's all they got. That's all they have left. It's a nothing burger campaign, and I really don't think it's going to be that close. Jim Talent of National Review and the Reagan Institute National Leadership Council, thank you very much. Joined by Sarah C. Bedford of the Washington Examiner, political and investigative reporter there. You can catch her on Twitter/X at Sarah C. Bedford. Good morning, Sarah. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Earlier in the week, you were on with Cavuto, and if I'm not mistaken, you kind of signaled you were kind of on team optimism in the sense that you think that whatever window that Kamala Harris's team had for some kind of a slogan to change the narrative and stop the slide had kind of passed, and they really didn't have anything. That's before the Trump is Hitler thing kind of came down the pike again and got dusted off. But here we are 11 days out. Do you see anything that's going to reverse the course for Kamala Harris?
I think it's really tough to see anything at this point, Dwayne. I mean, I think that she's really out of runway. We have 11 days left to go. Millions of early votes because of Democrats' designs have already been cast. And she's still sort of flailing about for a message here. Like you said, she this week is portraying Trump as Hitler. A week before, she's portraying herself as a centrist who's above attacking Trump on a personal level and calling for unity. You know, all of these tactics are in conflict with one another and suggest that this is a campaign that's desperate for any kind of foothold. And the ability for her to get one at this stage in the campaign is, I think, just over.
The New York Times Siena poll dropped this morning. This is their, quote, final poll. And in a two-way race, they're saying it's a straight-up tie. That's the headline. But, of course, it's not going to be a two-way race. Jill Stein is in it. It's a full field, right, of third-party and other candidates that are going to be there. And in that same poll, in a full field survey, Donald Trump actually has a 1-point lead in the New York Times Siena poll, 47-46. When you look at the crosstabs at the very end of it, the makeup of the electorate, according to the pollsters, is an R+1 electorate, which actually trues up to what Gallup says. And what makes this poll kind of telling, if indeed it is remotely close to accurate, who knows if they will, but if it's an R+1 field and they think Trump's up 1, then how does that square to where it was a month ago? Why they had Kamala Harris up by 3. It's a movement 4 points in Donald Trump's direction in a month. My question to you, Sarah Bedford, do you think everything is static now, or is there still movement underway over the next 11 days?
I think it's possible you could continue to see movement toward Donald Trump compared to where we were earlier this year. I think a lot of the social stigma around voting for Trump has largely fallen away. And there's this permission structure given by the polls because he's winning, and also by people who are more emboldened to speak up, for independents and moderates to vote for Donald Trump. That's partly because Kamala Harris has been so weak as a candidate, and because I think the Trump team has done a really good job of humanizing Trump. Those numbers from earlier in the summer where Kamala Harris's favorability numbers were up, where she was polling ahead of Donald Trump in the national polls, I think people were willing to give her the benefit of the doubt when she emerged a blank slate, and they were eager to see what she would paint on her blank canvas, for lack of a better term. But it's been nothing. She's given voters nothing, and so that benefit of the doubt has eroded completely at this point.
Last question. I know that both houses are off and they're campaigning. The House, every seat's up for grabs. A third of the Senate is up for grabs. I know Josh Hawley doesn't seem to have too much to worry about after his opponent shot a reporter. But it was just a hysterical story. The question I have for you is, what do your sources on the Hill tell you as to what both sides think going in? Who's more nervous? Who's on offense spending campaign cash in districts? What's the sense for how this is going down the stretch? Who's happier than the other side?
I think Republicans are very optimistic about their chances in the Senate. The math was in their favor this time around. They have a great candidate in Montana, so they've essentially pulled out of that race. They know they're going to win. They have some other opportunities. Dave McCormick is polling stronger against Bob Casey. Bernie Moreno might be able to ride some coattails of Donald Trump if there's a big victory in Ohio. There's less optimism among the Republicans I talked to about retaining House majority or growing that majority, because Democrats have spent pretty strategically in a lot of these battleground states, and some of those races have trended away from Republicans in California, for example, in the Orange County seat. So I think the optimism is there for the Senate, less so for the House.
Okay, so what's your call at this point? Do you think the election's baked, or do you think there's still something that's going to change the metric?
I think the dynamics of the race are pretty much baked, but it's close enough that it's hard to make a prediction. Even if your gut is telling you it's Trump this time, it's still anyone's race.
Fair enough. Sarah Bedford, follower on Twitter X at Sarah C. Bedford, reader in the Washington Examiner. She is one of the bright young reporters that are out there working today, and we love her to pieces. Sarah C. Bedford, thank you very much. I'm Dwayne Patterson, in for Hugh Hewitt.